Hello, Gene Schwimmer here. Welcome to today's vlog. Just one subject today. I'm afraid it's not a very happy one. Jury selection has been underway for a while now for the trial of the officers, the 4 officers involved in the George Floyd death. Actually, I believe it's just, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's the trial of one of the officers, Derek Chauvin. He is the one who had his knee on George Floyd's neck when he died. The jury is being selected for that. I am afraid I can already make a very unfortunate prediction. Well, you'll recall that when the incident happened, and this is the problem, people are already calling it a murder. We don't know. There hasn't been a trial yet, and it very well may not be a murder, and that is the problem. I'll get into that in more detail in a moment, but you will recall that when the incident first happened, there were massive riots, not just in Minneapolis where the incident happened, but around the country. I said at that time in an earlier vlog that the main problem was not waiting for the facts, not waiting for a verdict, rioting, already assuming what the outcome should be, assuming it's a murder, and going ahead and rioting without even waiting for a trial, number one. Number two, not waiting for a verdict. If the jury decides that it was murder, and I am pretty sure that they are not going to, I'll get into that in more detail in a moment. But, well, let's just give an extreme example. Let's say the officer, let's say all 4 of them are convicted of first-degree murder. All of them are sentenced to death. That would, I would think, satisfy all of these rioters. They couldn't even wait to see if that would happen. But what happens when the facts are known, when there is a jury verdict? And just as happened when the original rioting occurred, I don't think that these people are going to care what the verdict is. I don't think they're going to care or they're not going to care what the facts are, put it that way. Well, either way, if they get the conviction or the verdict that they want, they'll be happy. They won't look too much into what the facts are, maybe just to entertain themselves. But suppose the officers are not convicted of murder, or we're talking about Chauvin right now. Suppose Chauvin is not convicted of first-degree murder or even second-degree murder, any kind of a murder. Will these people, these mobs, look at the facts? Will they stop to look at the facts and determine for themselves how the jury reached the verdict that the jury reached? I don't think they will. I don't think they will. I think they will riot no matter what the verdict is. And now let's get to the case. I'm going to cite from an article by somebody I've cited him a few times, Jonathan Turley. He is a law professor at George Washington University Law School. He's very prominent. You've probably seen him on TV. I'm putting his photo up here. You may recognize him. He actually testified during the hearings in the House for the Trump first impeachment, the first sham impeachment. But, well, let's go right to the headline. George Floyd death. If Derek Chauvin is acquitted, the 3 other cases could collapse. And what Turley talks about in this article, I'll get into some quotes in a moment, the prosecution has a very weak case. Why did they arrest him in the first place? I would have thought that under normal circumstances that a police inquiry would have been done first to ascertain what the facts were, and perhaps there would not even have been a trial. I think public pressure, the public or these mobs demanded a trial, so we have to go through this process. But at the end of the day, as I said, I just fear riots all over the place. There is already security around the courthouse. That ain't going to be enough. They're going to need, in fact, I don't even think they'll be able to secure the whole city, which they would have to do, but I think you're going to see riots all over the country. I am praying that I am proven wrong, but I don't think I will be. But here are the problems with the case. I'll just quote from Turley's article. The prosecutors constructed the case against Chauvin. I may get these other names wrong, forgive me if I do. Alexander Kung, Thomas Lane, and Tao Thao like an upside-down pyramid resting on a conviction of Chauvin. The main charges against Kung, Lane, and Tao are as aiders and abettors to Chauvin's alleged murder or manslaughter. If Chauvin, this is the important part, if Chauvin is acquitted or the jury hangs on the charges, the prosecution of the other three officers becomes extremely difficult. And what I am sure Turley means here, if Chauvin is not convicted, then the cases just disappear for the other three, because you can't convict somebody of aiding and abetting a murder that never happened. That is one element that I worry about, but here is another. Well, I don't worry that that the cases against them will collapse if the cases against them should collapse. Again, I'm just saying the results, because what will happen, these riots I'm predicting, unfortunately, because if Chauvin, you're not just talking about one person getting off. If Chauvin gets off, if he's found not guilty, then they all get off, all four. So we have this death of George Floyd, and nobody punished, nobody strung up, no lynch mob, no anything. As I said, I just fear what's going to happen. But let me give you some more of Turley here, his reasoning. There are some very significant challenges for the prosecution, even with the infamous videotape of Chauvin with his knee on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes. There is a palpable fear that even mentioning countervailing defense arguments will trigger claims of racism or insensitivity to police abuse. However, the jury must unanimously convict on the basis of beyond a reasonable doubt after considering a variety of such arguments, including, and Turley's going to give the arguments that the jury is going to have to consider, but I just want to focus on this paragraph, because this was the reason for the arrest in the first place. I think you'll be called a racist if they were not arrested, because you could have had the inquiry without, just relieve them of duty, temporarily suspended these officers. But if anybody brings up this countervailing evidence, which is what the defense is going to do, the defense is going to obviously present a defense. But if you have any journalists, any talking heads on TV, and you may not because of the biased media that we have, but if anybody even reports, I fear, if anybody even reports the defense's arguments, they would be called racist. The reporters would, so they'll hesitate to report any countervailing evidence, which will just give more credence, unjustified credence in that case, to the prosecution, and cause, even because remember, you're probably going to have a sequestered jury, but in any case, a jury that will only consider the facts, not what the public wants, not public opinion. So you could, whatever the talking heads say on TV, they could refuse to, for whatever reason, out of fear or bias or some combination of both, not report the defense's argument, but arguments, plural, but the jury is going to hear these arguments and see the evidence, and all of the evidence, and the jury is going to have to reach a verdict. And remember, there's no such verdict as innocence, either guilty or not guilty, and all the defense has to do is create a reasonable doubt. Just create some doubt that Chauvin committed murder. So, well, let me just give you some more of Turley here, because he is pointing out the problems. So here we go. I said the jury has to consider a variety of arguments, including When called to the scene due to Floyd allegedly passing counterfeit money, Floyd denied using drugs, but later said he was, quote, hooping, unquote, or taking drugs. So first of all, Floyd was doing something illegal. I just want to get that out of the way. Nothing to do with the incident or the guilt or non-guilt of Chauvin or the other officers. But this is not a case of racial profiling or some white cops. And not all these cops were, well, you could tell by the names of the officers, they weren't all white. And I believe one of the officers was even black, I think. I'll have to check that. But he was doing something illegal. They had a reason to stop him. They had a reason to arrest him. It wasn't harassment. It wasn't racial profiling. Going to the next point, and this is important, the autopsy did not conclude that Floyd died from asphyxiation, though a family pathologist made that finding, and I'll get back to that in a minute. Rather, it found, quote, cardiopulmonary arrest while being restrained by law enforcement officers, unquote. The state's criminal complaint against Chauvin said the autopsy, quote, revealed no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. Mr. Floyd had underlying health conditions, including coronary artery disease and hypertension heart disease, unquote. He was also COVID-19 positive. So he had all these health problems, and the prosecution's own autopsy shows that there was no asphyxiation. He was not choked. He wasn't suffocated. We know that because if you say you can't breathe, you can breathe if you can talk. But the only contrary evidence, this is what the point I just want to make here, is that the family, who obviously has a bias, they hired their own pathologist to determine that it was asphyxiation. But you can be sure that the defense is going to present its experts, its own pathologists, to testify that it was not asphyxiation. You have right there reasonable doubt, I would say. You would have, and again, I'm not the jury, I'm saying you might have, just my opinion, you might have reasonable doubt there if you have, well, that's what logic would seem to dictate, if you have two expert pathologists reaching two different conclusions, and then you have the state's pathologist saying that there was no asphyxiation. And I talked about this in the past, that there's a disgusting video, I'm not going to play it, but after the George Floyd incident, shortly after, there's a video of a 20-year-old man with his knee on a 2-year-old child, a 2-year-old child's neck, needless to say, terrifying the child. But I'm not talking about the incident, except that the child survived. So you had an adult with his knee on the neck of a 2-year-old child, and the child did not suffocate. So you see how there's the potential for doubt. And you even have, well, let's go on to the chief medical examiner. This is another point by Turley. Andrew Baker, Hennepin County's chief medical examiner, strongly suggested that the primary cause of Floyd's death was a huge amount of fentanyl in Floyd's system. Quote, fentanyl had an 11 ng per milliliter, and I don't know what ng is, but it doesn't matter. We're talking relative terms here. Fentanyl at 11 ng per milliliter. This is higher than a chronic pain patient. If he were found dead at home alone and no other apparent causes, this could be acceptable to call an OD, or overdose. Deaths have been certified with levels of 3, and again, Floyd had a level of 11, unquote. Baker also told investigators that the autopsy revealed no physical evidence Floyd died of asphyxiation. Next point, the toxicology report on Floyd's blood also noted that, quote, In fatalities from fentanyl, blood concentrations are variable and have been reported as low as 3 ng per milliliter, unquote. Floyd had almost 4 times the level of fentanyl considered potentially lethal. Next point. Floyd notably repeatedly said that he could not breathe while sitting in the police cruiser and before he was ever restrained on the ground. That is consistent with the level of fentanyl in his system that can cause, quote, slowed or stopped breathing, unquote. Finally, the restraint using an officer's knee on an uncooperative suspect was part of the training of officers, and jurors will watch training videotapes employing the same type of restraint as official policy. In other words, Chauvin was doing what he was trained to do. It's a standard means of restraining a suspect, at least in the Minneapolis Police Department, and there are even training videos showing the restraint being used, and the jurors are going to see those videos. So you can see all these bases for doubt. It really looks to me, and I could be wrong again, I'm not in the jury, I'm not hearing the evidence, seeing everything, I'm not watching a cross-examination, but I do see the possibility that Floyd died because of his other health problems and from being on fentanyl. The question is, how was Chauvin supposed to know that? How was he supposed to know? He wasn't a doctor, and if somebody's sitting up and just saying they can't breathe, and he's talking, so the worst, if these facts pan out in a trial, would be manslaughter, maybe, which is what Turley says. Floyd was making a fuss, and the officer Chauvin was not taking seriously enough Floyd's protestations. Well, I'm not going to go too much farther except to say that I see the possibility, not the probability, I see the possibility, first of all, of Chauvin not being convicted of anything and getting off, and that means the other 3 get off. But I definitely see, or I agree with Turley, that again, we cannot predict the results, but the prosecution is going to have quite a burden to prove first-degree murder, or even second-degree murder, or I would even say third-degree murder. So I don't think, this is getting back to my prediction, that I don't think that these mobs are going to be satisfied with the verdict, whatever it is. Unless it's first-degree murder, I think they are going to riot. Minneapolis has to be prepared for it. We have to be prepared for it. I guess I'm just going to leave it there and just hope that I'm wrong. Thumbs up if you like this video. Share it with anybody you think would also like the video. Got any comments? Comment section below the video where you can put questions, suggestions for future topics. You can subscribe. I love getting new subscribers. You can visit my music channel, my cooking channel, links in the description. And you can come back and see me again. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me, and I'm glad that you came to spend some time with me. I would love to see all of you again. I look forward to seeing all of you again, and until I do see all of you again, bye.